Good afternoon, and welcome to the USDA ReConnect Virtual Post-Award Workshop. My name is Farwa Naqvi, and I am the Engineering Branch Chief in the Portfolio Management and Risk Assessment Division of USDA's Rural Utilities Service. This presentation will focus on the advanced procedures for requesting ReConnect Program Award funds. I will take 10 to 15 minutes near the end of the presentation to answer any questions. To ask a question, type it in the text box at the bottom, then click the Send Question button or hit Enter on your keyboard. Even though we won't address questions until after the presentation, please feel free to submit questions throughout the session. We'll answer them as long as time allows. If you have specific questions regarding your award, please feel free to schedule a time slot during our office hours so that we can discuss and provide you with the appropriate guidance. Office hours information can be found in the post-award event guide. Also, we will be holding an open Q&A session on Friday at 2 p.m. to answer outstanding questions. A few more logistical items to note before I dive into the presentation. One, this session will broadcast through your computer speakers, so please make sure that your volume is on and turned up. If you are unable to listen via your device, please submit a question in the Q&A pod, and our support team will reach out to help. And if we encounter technological issues, bear with us as we address the problem. A recording of this session and relevant materials will be available on the ReConnect website's Forms and Resources page and on the workshop's Google site in the coming days. Now let's go ahead and get started. The agenda for this presentation is primarily to cover the advance and disbursement procedures for ReConnect award funds. But I will also mention some tips that will assist awardees in getting the advance request approved in a timely manner, and the resources that are available for awardees to use. The advanced procedures for the ReConnect program are covered in the ReConnect Construction Procedures Guide. This guide was included as an attachment to the legal agreement that all the awardees received. The guide can also be found on the ReConnect website under Forms and Resources. By no means will I be able to cover everything that is included in the ReConnect Construction Procedures Guide due to time constraints. So I'm going to focus on some important topics such as the award budget, the pledge deposit account, the financial requirement statement, and some general requirements as they relate to advancing of funds. To begin with, once an award is approved, an award budget is created based on information that's included in the Capital Investment Workbook. Excuse me momentarily, it looks like there's a fire alarm going on. 1 second. My apologies. The award budget is divided into categories that are associated with the proposed projects, such as equipment, outside plant, buildings, professional services, etc. Funds from one budget category may not be used for a different budget category without prior written approval from RUS. If more funds are required than are available in a budget category, the awardee may request RUS approval of a budget adjustment to use funds from another budget category. The request to transfer funds from one budget category to another shall include an explanation as to why the adjustment is needed and the affected budget categories. RUS will not approve a budget adjustment unless the awardee can demonstrate that all purposes can still be completed with the requested adjustment. RUS, at its discretion, may make a budget adjustment without a formal request to encumber funds for a contract when funds within the budget category are insufficient and when it determines that the budget adjustment is insignificant. Before we get started on the procedures, there are a few key definitions in the guide that I would like to cover. The first key definition is an advance. Well, what does an advance mean? An advance simply means that once an FRS is approved by RUS, the approved amount is deposited into the awardee's pledge deposit account. The second key definition is a disbursement. A disbursement means a payment out of the pledge deposit account for an approved purpose, such as an invoice related to an approved contract. It also refers to reimbursement if an awardee has paid for any invoices for approved award purposes out of its general fund account. The third key definition here is a pledge deposit account, and this is an account that all ReConnect awardees have to establish that will be used to deposit all grant, loan, match, and equity funds. And the last definition is a financial requirement statement, or short for an FRS. This is a standard form, RES Form 481, that is used by the awardee to request award funds. It is also used to record and control transactions that happen in the pledge deposit account. There are two standard forms that are relevant to the advance process. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is the RES Form 481 or FRS. And the second one is the RUS Form 771A. Both of these forms will be covered in detail during this presentation. Both of these forms can also be found on our website at the link shown on the screen. Some key points to keep in mind regarding the advance process are the award documents, specifically the legal agreements, contain the provisions regarding the advances and disbursement of award funds by the awardee. 2, all matching and/or equity funds that are required for project completion must be deposited in the pledge deposit account and expended prior to requesting any grant funds. The only exception are funds requested for eligible pre-app expenses. And finally, if any design or budget changes are needed after an award has been made, those changes must be approved by RUS. A few key points regarding the pledge deposit account. This account must only be established in a bank or depository where deposits are insured by the FDIC or other federal agency acceptable to RUS. The funds in the pledge deposit account must be used solely for the purpose approved in the application and must be withdrawn or dispersed for the approved purposes for which they were requested on the financial requirement statement. RUS may require that other funds, including match equity or general fund contributions for project completion, proceeds from the sale of property, interest received on award funds, and similar types of receipts be deposited into the pledge deposit account. And lastly, the funds must be dispersed from the PDA only up to the amount approved for advance as indicated on the FRS. Now let's talk about some of the items that can be requested on the FRS. For all outside plant contracts, up to 95% of the approved contract amount can be advanced on the FRS. The remaining amount will be advanced after RUS approves the contract closeout documentation. For equipment and construction contracts related to buildings and towers, up to 90% of the approved contract amount can be advanced on the FRS, and the remaining amount can be advanced after RUS approves the closeout documents. For professional services rendered by a third party, again, up to 90% of the approved contract amount can be advanced, and the remaining amount upon contract closeout. If the professional services are rendered by internal staff of the awardee that was approved by RUS under an in-house engineering proposal, then 100% of the incurred cost of the services can be requested and approved on the FRS, as long as sufficient documentation such as timesheets and cost detail sheets are provided to support the requested amount. Some other items that can be included on the FRS are pre-app expenses. These will be limited to the amount included in the award budget. Funds requested for pre-application expenses must be supported by itemized invoices or receipts, and the invoices must clearly indicate the date and the description of the services that were rendered. Funds can also be requested for vehicles, operating, work, and office equipment, and that can be funded 100% of the invoiced amount. In addition, costs for right-of-way acquisition, make-ready, and permits can also be requested, again, based on the itemized invoices, and we can fund 100% of the invoice amount. The last item I would like to discuss are the approved work orders. The approved work orders is a line item on the FRS that is used to request funds for all small-scale construction projects that are completed by utilizing either the 773 contract method or the work orders method. These two methods are described in more detail in the ReConnect Construction Procedures Guide and will also be covered during tomorrow's presentation. When performing small-scale construction, please make sure that RUS work order procedures described in RUS Bulletin 1770-1 are followed. Unless otherwise approved by RUS, the awardee shall finance all small-scale construction with its own funds and obtain reimbursement with ReConnect award funds when the work is completed. The RUS Form 771A is used as a basis for advancing funds for small-scale construction projects that were completed. The 771A form must be certified by an authorized official of the awardee. It must also be signed by a licensed engineer or a staff engineer approved by RUS who will perform the inspection. The 771A form must also be initialed by the GFR, or the General Field Representative. I will provide additional details on this step a little later. All small-scale construction projects listed on the 771A form must be part of the approved application. All labor, including the cost of any engineering services related to the project and material costs for each project, must be clearly shown in the respective columns on the 771A form. And finally, the 771A form must be accompanied by a supplemental document that provides a detailed description of each project listed on the form. In the next slide, I will cover the information that needs to be provided as part of this description. Here's an image of a 771A form. As I stated in the previous slide, a detailed description of each project needs to be provided. The description should include, a brief description of the work performed, the location where the work was performed, and here you need to include adequate details so that ER approval verification can be done, and the method that was used to perform the work. For example, whether a 773 contract was used or in-house labor was used to do the work, or a combination of both. The date that the work was completed, and the explanations of any costs listed in column G of the Form 771A. And what that means is if there are any costs that you would like, that you do not want advances for, you need to back those costs out in column G. Here's another image of a 771A form. As you can see, the maximum value stated on this form indicates $1 million. Please note that this maximum value for outside plant construction projects is only applicable to the ReConnect program. The other sub-programs within the RUS telecommunications program have other maximum limits of either $250,000 or $500,000. So here's how the reimbursement process works for small-scale construction projects. And the reason why I mentioned reimbursement here is because, the small-scale construction has to be financed by the awardees funds and then, reimbursed through the on an FRS. So once the 771A form has been properly completed and executed by the authorized official of the awardee and the engineer, it needs to be forwarded to GFR for review. The GFR will review the supporting documentation, meaning the project descriptions, the timesheets, invoices, etc., for each work order that's listed on the 771A form. It is possible that during this review that the GFR may have some follow-up questions, which I will cover in the next slides. Once the GFR completes his or her review, he or she will initial the Form 771A form and return to the awardee. The awardee can then submit the signed the awardee can submit the signed 771A form along with the FRS. During the GFR's review, the GFR may have some follow-up questions, such as, was the RES Form 771 completed properly? Did the awardee submit a detailed project description for each project that's listed on the 771A form? Are all the costs shown on the 771A form for completed projects? Does the awardee have proper documentation to adequately support the labor and materials costs? And what I mean by that is there a contract, the RES Form 773 contract, is that in place? Was it properly executed? Are timesheets in place? Are invoices for materials, adequately support the amount that's shown on the 771A form? Are all the projects part of the approved ReConnect application? Do any of the projects require environmental approval? If so, has the awardee received the approval? If the awardee staff engineer is signing the RUS Form 771A, has this person been approved by RUS to perform in-house engineering services? Did the awardee ensure that performance bonds were secured for projects exceeding $250,000 that were completed using RUS Form 773? Now that I've covered all the different items that can be requested on the FRS, let's dive into how the actual process works. However, before I start, I would like to mention that the funds advance process cannot start until an awardee gets a notification letter that ReConnect award funds have been released for their respective award. Along with this notification letter, the awardee also receives an Excel version of the FRS template. This template is prepared specifically for the awardee because it includes the name and address of the awardee, the award designation, and the award amounts. It also lists all the approved equipment, construction, and professional services contracts and their respective amounts. In addition, any matching and or equity funds that have been deposited in the pledge deposit account will also be reflected on the FRS template. You can use the FRS template to prepare your first advance request. And if for any reason you haven't received the FRS template along with your release of funds notification letter, then please contact your respective GFR. The first step in order to request funds is to make sure that a properly completed FRS is submitted to RUS. You should also submit a cover letter to describe the items that advances are being requested for. As I mentioned before, the FRS is used by RUS and the awardee to record and control transactions in the pledge deposit account. Finally, the FRS must be signed by an authorized official of the awardee whose name and signature appears on the RUS Form 675. And this form is called the Certificate of Authority. And this was one of the required forms that all ReConnect awardees had to complete and submit with their executed legal documents. The FRS will not be processed if the FRS is signed by an individual whose name is not included on the 675 form. Only approved purposes should be shown on the FRS. Aside from tower contracts, funds for work that was completed under the 773 contract must be requested under work orders and not listed individually on the FRS. The total funds requested for each approved purpose on the FRS should be within the total approved for advance amount shown in column 2, unless an amendment or closeout has been approved by RUS since the last FRS or an amendment / closeout is submitted with the current submission of the FRS. Here's an image of an RUS Form 481 or FRS. And I'm going to very briefly cover, what all the different columns are here. So columns 1 and 2 can be completed by the awardee, but will be updated by RUS. Columns 3, 4, and 6 should be completed by the awardee, and column 5 will be completed by RUS. Please note that the amounts in column 6 should not exceed the amount shown in column 3. Line item 17 is very critical line item. The amount that should be shown on line item 17, which is the cash balance for general ledger, should be the balance in the construction fund account as of the financial information report date. And the total of column 3 must equal to line item 20, which is column 6, line item 12, plus line item 17, and line item 18, plus line item 19. So these are some of the things that you can check for to make sure that your FRS is completed correctly before you submit it to RUS. Here's an example of an FRS with 5 line items. I will cover each line item and show and highlight the ones with the improper amounts. The first line item is outside plant contract A1X. And as you can tell, this is split up into two separate line items. The first line item reflects the amount that's owed, the contract amount that's owed to the contractor. And the second line item is the owner furnished materials portion of the outside plant contract. So the first line item, it looks like based on the amounts, the total approved contract amount is $100,000. And the way you can tell is by adding columns 1 and 2. So of the $100,000, $95,000 has been approved for advance, as shown in column 2, and $5,000 is the withheld amount. As I mentioned earlier, the awardee can request funds up to the amount shown in column 2, but cannot exceed it. As we see in this example, the awardee has already drawn down $30,000 on this contract on a previous FRS. So only $65,000 should have been requested in column 4 instead of $70,000. The second line item listed here is again the amount related to the owner furnished materials for the outside plant contract A1X. The OFM portion is $10,000 and the entire amount is approved for advance when the contract is approved. Please note that there is no withheld amount associated with this line item, because we understand that the awardee is already paid for the OFM, and when the funds are approved, the awardee will reimburse the general fund account for these materials cost. The third line item, which is special equipment contract A2. Here we see that the total approved contract amount is $10,000, of which $9,000 have been approved for advance as shown in column 2, and $1,000 is the withheld amount. The awardee has also drawn down $2,000 for this contract on a previous FRS and is requesting an additional $7,000 on the current FRS. However, when you look at the disbursement amount in column 6, it shows $10,000. This is incorrectly stated because the column 6 amount must always be less than or equal to the column 3 amount. On the fourth line item, which is engineering contract A3E, you will see the same issue on this line item where the disbursed amount in column 6 not only exceeds the column 3 amount, but also exceeds the total approved amount of the contract by $750. And then the last line item, which is COE contract A4. As you can tell that this contract has an F in parentheses, and this indicates that the contract has been closed out. You will also notice for this line item that there is no withheld amount. As I mentioned earlier, once closeout documents for a contract have been approved by RUS, the final amount is reflected in column 2. Now, how do the funds flow? Because we have all kinds of different combinations with, grants, 100% grants, we have 50/50s, we have, applicants who applied under the 50/50 combo, but then substituted equity funds in lieu of loan funds. So the question is, how do the funds flow? Well, for the 50/50 awards, or the ones that applied under 50/50 but substituted equity funds, the eligible pre-op expenses will be funded with grant funds on the first advance request, after which all loan funds must be drawn down before a request for additional grant funds is submitted to RUS. Now, again, for the ones that substituted equity funds, the eligible pre-op expenses will be funded with grant funds on the first advance request, after which all equity funds that were substituted in lieu of loan funds must be fully expended before a request for additional grant funds is submitted. For the 100% grant awards, all eligible pre-op expenses will be funded with grant funds on the first advance request, after which all match funds must be fully expended before a request for additional grant funds is submitted to RUS. Now, here are some tips that you can follow to ensure that FRSs are processed in a timely manner. First of all, FRSs are reviewed on a first-come, first-served basis. Please ensure that all executed documents and certifications are signed by authorized officials. Establish a good working relationship with your RUS General Field Representative. Submit complete documentation because minor oversights can cause major delays. And be realistic with review and approval timeframes. And here's some tips for success. Please understand the ReConnect program rules and requirements that may be unique to your ReConnect project. Become familiar with award documents, especially the ReConnect Construction Procedures Guide. Plan construction build-out activities, keeping in mind seasonal construction windows and timelines. And this one is very important. Please maintain compliance with all reporting requirements in award documents. Maintain accurate and verifiable records sufficient to meet federal procurement requirements into CFR 200. Some of the resources that are available to you are the ReConnect website. Obviously, it has a wealth of information on the ReConnect program. And as I mentioned earlier, the advanced procedures are covered in the ReConnect Construction Procedures Guide. And this guide is available under the forms and resources on the ReConnect website. The second available resource is the RD website. And the link that you see here will take you to the RD webpage where all the standard forms are located. Once you're on this page, you can click the link for the telecommunications forms and access all the standard forms that you need. And the third and most important available resource that's available to you is the General Field Representative. So please reach out to your respective GFR if you have any questions. If you're not sure about who your GFR is, then please look at the Telecom GFR page for the name and contact information of the GFR that has jurisdiction over your state. Lastly, you can also call the RUS Portfolio Management and Risk Assessment Division at the number shown on the screen. One final note on available resources, you can also use the Contact Us form that's located on the ReConnect website. When using the Contact Us form, please select Other in the subject dropdown and submit your question. Also include your phone number in case we need to contact you for further clarification. And this is the forms link that'll take you to this location. And with that, it's now time to transition to the Q&A portion of our session. Again, I'll read out the question and provide you with the answer as time allows. Please give me a moment to open and review the questions in the queue. The first question is, can an applicant submit a Form 481 with only pre-application expenses? And the answer is yes. The first 481 form that is submitted can only be for pre-application expenses. The second question is, if a grant project has environmental clearance but not release the funds, can an FRS be submitted to start dispersing match funds? And the answer is yes, we can go ahead and review the pre-release FRSs, and we will guide those ReConnect awardees as to how that process is going to work. The third question is, what is a realistic review and approval timeframe? Our goal is to try to review and process FRS within 2 weeks. However, there could be unrealistic, delays due to other factors. And if that happens to be the case, we will make sure that we let you know. The next question is, can we use existing materials such as fiber? There is a long lead time on some materials. And for this question, I believe it's best suited to be answered under the ReConnect construction procedures. That's scheduled for tomorrow. However, I will let George, if he wants to address this today, he can certainly do that. If not, we can go ahead and address it tomorrow as well. The next question is, can 100% grant recipients request a reimbursement for up to 90% of costs? The 90% relates to approved contracts. So I'm not exactly sure what the question is related to, but a contract has to be approved by RUS, upon which 90% of the cost, 90% of the approved contract amount can be available for advance. The next question is, do all matching funds have to be deposited in the pledge deposit account up front? Initially, that's how the legal agreements were set up, that all the matching funds had to be deposited in the pledge deposit account. However, recently, the agency issued a letter amendment to all the awardees to deposit those funds over time. However, the one thing to keep in mind is that no grant or loan funds, no grant funds will be advanced until all matching funds have been expended. I am not seeing any other questions. Okay, there's a few more questions coming. Just give me a minute. We funded our PDA 5 months ago, and we are just not getting our closing documents approved by USDA. Is the interest earned in the pledge deposit account to this point able to be paid back to the awardee? I believe that is the case, that the interest earned on the matching funds, can be drawn down by the awardee. Does the PDA need to be different bank account than the RUS construction fund we already have for electric division? And it looks like the electric division is an RUS borrower. And the answer is yes, it needs the PDA needs to be set up in a separate account. The next question is, does the funds verification letter and or project specific 481 form require an approved ER prior to being sent? The RUS will not be able to approve any funds if the ER has not been approved. The next question is, where can we obtain the letter you spoke of regarding the matching funds? Sorry, where can we obtain the letter you spoke of regarding the matching funds deposit changes if we have not received this notification letter? If you have not received the notification letter, then could you please send me an email? I would be more than happy to look into it for you. My email address is Farwa, Farwa, .naqvi @usda.gov. I am not seeing any other questions come through. And there's a couple of questions which we're going to respond back a little later. The next question is, do they need a letter if Schedule 1 is clear on the subject of match? As I said initially, the Schedule 1 includes the match amount. And as far as when those funds will be deposited, instead of them being deposited all on day one, they are going to be deposited over time. We're allowing them to be deposited over time. So it's just the timing as to when the matching funds need to be deposited. The requirement to spend the match prior to advancing any grant funds, with the exception of eligible pre-app expenses, is still the same. I'm not seeing any more questions come through. It looks like we've reached the end of our scheduled time. So thank you again for participating. Again, if you have additional questions, you're welcome to schedule a virtual meeting through office hours. And have a good afternoon.